what I want to do today is comment on two things, briefly put into context the structural policy issues in the light of the recent international economic situation, and then to comment briefly on also on the APEC Economic Policy Report, the theme of which this year is competition policy. Now let me just make some brief comments on the current international situation. As you're all aware, the global economy has been reeling from the effects of both commodity price shocks and then subsequently the fallout from the financial crisis. Now, not surprisingly, the focus of governments at the moment have been on trying to restore trust and confidence in the financial system. And that's involved quite an array of policy responses from across the globe. And now the effects of that financial crisis are starting to impact on the real economy. You will have seen news of how that's affecting the housing market, but in particular consumer demand, how it's affecting business investment, and not surprisingly, as a result of declining share prices, that will impact on business investment, and how it is starting to affect, or there are indicators that it's starting to affect, unemployment rates. The initial focus of policy of many governments has been to try and, as I said, restore confidence in the financial system and trust, but also they have been focusing on how to maintain and minimise the effects on domestic demand in their various economies, and that's involved different fiscal and monetary policy initiatives. In due course, and this has already been indicated by the G20 leaders' statement, they will be also, in time, having to look at regulatory and corporate governance issues around financial markets and other markets, and the competition policy environment in which these markets are operating. Now, what I'd like to suggest today is that these structural policy issues will be very important policy issues that governments will have to face as we go through the effects of the financial crisis, and the way in which we implement structural policies will be crucial to the way in which economies recover from this crisis. And that is why the work of the Economic Committee in APEC is particularly important. The current crisis has actually underscored the importance of structural policies. In other words, the importance of corporate governance, regulation and competition policies. And that is where the focus of the Economic Committee's work has been. As the OECD and other international financial institutions have commented, structural reforms, which are really designed to help markets operate more efficiently, help deal with the medium-term response to this crisis. Good structural policies, and in particular good corporate governance practices, regulation and competition policy, well designed, will help the functioning of financial markets and commodity markets. Now, let me just comment briefly on the work of the Economic Committee this past year. We have been running a number of seminars and workshops to try and improve understanding of how to design good regulation, competition policy and governance structures in economies. Some of you will be familiar with the structural reform ministerial meeting that took place in Melbourne in August of this year. And one of the themes of that ministerial meeting, which of course was the first ministerial meeting on structural policies held in APEC, One of the themes was good practice in regulation. And the ministers at that structural reform ministerial meeting endorsed one of the pieces of work by the Economic Committee, which was explaining good practices in regulation. That work will help your economies in the APEC region design good regulations to deal with the current financial crisis. They also endorsed a review of institutional frameworks in the region for dealing with structural policies, and that review will take place next year. The insights from that review will help inform economies about how to design good policy institutions to deal with structural policies. Now let me turn to the APEC Economic Policy Report, which will be released on the 20th, and for which there is a summary available at the end of this presentation. The theme of this report this year is competition policy. And the report has three parts to it. The first chapter of the report focuses on how competition policy helps improve the structure and the behaviour of markets and the efficiency of markets, and how it improves the structure of economies, how competition policy can improve the way markets work and make economies more resilient to the type of shocks we're currently facing in the global economy now. It also summarises some of the insights that members of APEC have gained from the various workshops and seminars we've held over the last couple of years, and it puts forward some suggestions for future work for APEC. That chapter was designed to provide a backdrop to the other chapters. The second chapter was prepared by, I should say, but of course it had input from all members of APEC. The second chapter focuses on the lessons and implementation of competition policy in economies at different stages of development. You'll appreciate that APEC is a club of economies which at different stages of economic development. And we thought it was important to gain some insights into how competition policy is handled in the different economies at their different stages of development. And it does provide some interesting insights, which I'll comment on a moment. That chapter was prepared by Peru, and it had a lot of input from other economies in the region, but I'm grateful to Peru for leading the development of that chapter. The third chapter, which I think you will find of particular interest if you're interested in competition policy, the third chapter summarises the priorities in competition policy for each member economy in the APEC region. So it provides a summary of the developments and important features in each economy and what the future challenges are. So, for example, there is a chapter on Peru and summarises what the competition policy framework is in Peru and what it sees as the policy priorities for the future. That's just a high-level summary. Michael, I think at this point I'll be happy to take any questions on the report or the work of the Economic Committee on Structural Reform.
Thank you, Professor Buckle, for your presentation.
We're from China's Xinhua News Agency of China, and we'd like to know your opinion on this function of APEC in helping the member economies in the middle of this global financial crisis. And secondly, we would like to know the expectation of APEC from China, well, in the future development of the region, if there is any. And for the last, we would like to know your foresight of China's future development and its influence in the region? Thank you very much.
Well, I'll start with the last question first. China is, of course, a very important economy for the region. China has, for the last 15 years, been engaging much more with the global economy, and that has had beneficial effects in the global economy as well as beneficial effects for China itself. China is, since it has opened its economy to more international trade and international engagement, has been growing very rapidly and has been a crucial engine of growth for the global economy. Just as the Indian economy has been as well, those two economies are very important economies to global growth. In fact, I think that will be, I'm speculating somewhat, but I think the growth of India and China could be very important in helping the global economy come through the current recession. That will be, I think, a significant contrast to the period of the 1930s, where of course, the global economy went into a severe recession, a severe depression, and although India and China will no doubt be affected by the global financial crisis, and probably you will see their growth rates slow down, they still will be growing at quite rapid rates compared to the developed world. Now, let me just comment on why these economies are growing so fast. One of the reasons they're growing so fast is that they are starting from a lower income base. And what tends to happen is that when you open up economies, less developed economies, when you open them up to open up their markets, engage in international trade, open up their financial markets to international financial flows and international trade, they tend to grow very fast. And it's what we economists call catch-up. They grow a lot faster than the developed economies, and then they start to catch up. Their levels of income start to catch up. And that catch-up phase means there is stronger growth for everyone. Now, so I think that helps answer question 3 and question 2. If China and India come through this crisis with fairly good growth rates, that will be very important for the rest of the global economies. Now, how can APEC help in the current situation? Well, what I would like to say, and of course the leaders will have a lot more to say about this later in the week, and ministers will have a lot more to say about this, but what I can comment on is the work that APEC is doing now and how it's relevant to the current financial situation, global financial situation. The APEC has three important economic committees. One is the Committee on Trade and Investment, which is encouraging open trade and free trade and encouraging the reduction of barriers to trade. Now, that role of the Committee on Trade and Investment will be a very important role to illustrate the benefits of open trade and to try and encourage economies to not revert to protectionism. The reversion to protectionism that took place in the 1930s was a factor that led to the Depression. So I think the Committee on Trade and Investment has an important role to play to promote open trade during the current situation. A second economic committee, important committee in APEC is the Finance Ministers process. And they are doing work on the functioning of financial markets and the role of fiscal policy. And the work they do will have have an important role in helping inform economies about the current financial situation, informing economies about how to tackle regulation in financial markets, but also informing economies how to face the future fiscal challenges that we will be facing. Now, by that I mean, there will, in the current recession, you'll find a lot of governments will be facing fiscal pressures. Their tax revenues will start to decline, and some economies will be facing larger budget deficits than they have in the past. That will mean that we will have some fiscal challenges in the future. We have to finance those deficits today, but we have to pay for those deficits in the future. So that committee has an important role to play in helping inform economies how to do that. The third important committee is my committee, the Economic Committee, which focuses on domestic behind-the-border barriers to trade and doing business. And those are regulations, competition policy, corporate governance. And we're trying to help inform economies how to design good regulation and good competition policies and good corporate governance, which, as I said before, will be very important for economies to help become more resilient to these type of shocks and help them come out of this crisis in better shape. Thank you.